February 4th, 2013 marks the day of the official US release for Fire Emblem Awakening. This game was developed to be the final celebratory send-off for a dying game franchise. The final love letter to the fans of one of Nintendo's oldest game series. Or so we thought. Flash to 10 years later, and many Fire Emblem fans like myself are playing the newest installment in the franchise, being Fire Emblem Engage. And you might be wondering to yourself, what even happened in that 10-year time frame that could have caused such a resurgence in the franchise? Well, my friends, gather on the campfire as I tell you the tale of how one franchise was almost laid to rest and eventually found its awakening. Fire Emblem got its first start into development in 1983, when a game designer known as Shozo Kaga wished to create a game combining a classic role-playing fantasy story with Nintendo's strategy game known as Famicom Wars. 3 years later in 1990, the first Fire Emblem game would release in Japan. Initial sales for the game weren't impressive, likely due to the game releasing on the Famicom the same year as the Super Famicom's release, though over time Fire Emblem eventually picked up traction, selling over 329,000 copies for its first title. The second game in this series? Not so much. But the third game is where Fire Emblem had its huge leap, selling over 767,000 copies and was the best-selling Fire Emblem game for Japanese audiences for over 18 years. Just as fast as Fire Emblem blew up, it trickles down by the release of Fire Emblem 5, struggling to reach 100,000 copies sold. Thracia marks the second time the official release of a Fire Emblem game would come out in the same year as a brand new console, being the Nintendo GameCube. With this financial failure in the leave of Shozo Kaga, as well as character designer Mayumi Hirota and music composer Yuka Sugiyoko, Intelligent Systems was forced to make changes. Originally, they started development for the game Fire Emblem Maiden of Darkness, which was a scrapped game originally planned for the Nintendo 64. Fire Emblem moved in a completely different direction, releasing on the handheld Nintendo GameCube Advance, which was a smart decision as the Game Boy Advance sold nearly 4 times better than the GameCube. The other change to the Fire Emblem series was releasing it worldwide as opposed to staying a Japanese exclusive. This was met with resounding success as sales for Fire Emblem 7 and 8 were the highest the series had ever seen, nearly cracking 1 million copies sold with Fire Emblem 7. At this point, fans of the Fire Emblem series may have been feeling quite optimistic at the future prospects for the series, but what no one knew was this was going to be the peak of Fire Emblem's success, and the downfall of the series had just begun. Fire Emblem Path of Radiance and its sequel Radiant Dawn aren't bad games by any means, yet the sales made a pretty dramatic drop. These titles marked the return from handheld back to home console for the first time since Fire Emblem 5. Path of Radiance was a game released on the much less popular GameCube, and in all honesty the game probably overperformed due to advertisement from Super Smash Bros. For how less popular of a console the GameCube was to the Game Boy. It also didn't help that the Fire Emblem series seemed to have developed some sort of nasty curse to release a game just a year before a new console would come out, as the Wii released late 2006. Radiant Dawn was the home console direct sequel to Path of Radiance, and even though the Wii was a much more successful game console than the GameCube, The sequel aspect of Radiant Dawn seemed to have made it hard to dive into the series, ironically being on a console advertised as the most welcoming to new gamers around the globe. Intelligent Systems only slightly bounced back with a seemingly perfect recipe to boost sales for their next title. Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon returned to the handheld market on Nintendo's most popular game console, releasing in 2008 as a remake of the first Fire Emblem game. And for everyone outside of Japan, this was the first game containing Fire Emblem's mascot Marth. This in theory should have been the perfect recipe for a booming success, but it didn't perform much better than the previous two games, despite Intelligent Systems' best efforts. The last three Fire Emblem games couldn't even come close to matching the GBA titles, or even Fire Emblem 3 released back in 1994. But Fire Emblem New Mystery of the Emblem was a true nail in the coffin for the Fire Emblem franchise. Released in July 2010, New Mystery of the Emblem was only released for a Japanese audience, as Intelligent Systems did not believe English fans would like it, which is a great sign for a new title. This game also added controversial features to the series like casual mode. The series had so much appeal due to its permadeath feature, and it added a mode to turn that off. And yet again, in less than a year from a Fire Emblem release date, a new console was set to release just around the corner. The 3DS was nearly the final nail in the coffin for the Fire Emblem series due to this, which is almost comical knowing what the future of this series holds. Fire Emblem was always a popular game series, but never able to pass the 1 million copies sold on a singular title. And with the decline in sales, Intelligent Systems were told something horrifying. At the time of development for the next game, executives at Nintendo had told Intelligent Systems that this would be the last game in the 22-year-old Fire Emblem series. With one last game, the developers put their heart and soul into the eternal slumber of the Fire Emblem series. And this game ended up being the awakening to the series. This game, titled Fire Emblem Awakening, on the Nintendo 3DS. For the first time in the Fire Emblem series, they had a game on their hands that managed to hit 2 million copies sold. It did so well that the game that was supposed to be the last had spawned 4 to 6 mainline games in just 10 years of being released. There are many factors that played into Awakening's success that I wish to discuss. The first being what they did prior to people getting their hands on the game with their marketing. For the first time, Fire Emblem actually had good marketing outside of jamming the characters into Super Smash Bros. This game's trailers featured some of the best 3D cutscenes for its time that more than hold up. They're even more impressive when you consider that these were made on the 3DS. Another major factor was actually releasing the game at a good time in the console's lifespan. The 3DS is one of the best selling consoles of all time, and it's been proven that the handheld titles had sold better. Combine both of these factors with Fire Emblem Awakening's Japanese release being only a year and 1 month after the launch of the 3DS, and you're already setting yourself up for success, with over 200,000 copies sold in the first 2 weeks of Awakening's release. I believe Zerk Monster Hunter did a great job pointing out the many reasons why Awakening's marketing helped boost the sales. I recommend checking that video out for more info. It's clear that what Awakening did pre-release had a big influence, but just as important as the trailers are, you have to actually have a good game on your hands. We talked about the sales of FE12 and how it may have nearly killed the series as a whole, but a lot of the features from this title were huge to attracting new fans and being more accessible. The avatar feature is something criticized for its overuse in the series, but it's clear that many people liked a self-insert character. As a kid playing this game when I was 10 years old, I ate that shit up. The customizability introduced in Awakening, more importantly for the avatar, played a major factor as well. There is so much you can customize in Fire Emblem Awakening. I may not even be able to list them all, but I'll try. There's the selection of units you want to use, the way your avatar looks, the multiple class lines your units can go down, And the biggest of all, the pair up mechanic where you could ship 2 units together to get a child unit in a new chapter to play through. The child mechanic was a huge selling point for this game. Even if you want to call it cringe and shoehorned in later games, there is much to be said about how fun it is to try and gain the right skills on 2 units to pass off to create the ultimate killing machine. It's even more fun if it's between 2 units you see as a good couple. Fire Emblem Awakening also had a map you could move on like Sacred Stones, instead of putting you directly into the next map. This allows the player the opportunity to pick between dozens of different main maps and paralogs, or grinding maps to play the game at their own pace. And the last thing I want to give a major spotlight to is the casual mode mechanic. Fire Emblem's roots are a strategy game where when a unit dies they stay dead, so it seems almost blasphemous to introduce a setting that turns that off. But as someone who's an advocate of player freedom, I think this was a great change, especially for international audiences that have had Fire Emblem games for way less time and have been less exposed to the series as a whole. If people were interested in the series but put off by permadeath, they now had a way to enjoy the game without that worry, which I think is a great decision on Intelligent Systems' part. Fire Emblem Awakening was a game that Nintendo put a large amount of marketing in, as well as catering to a wider audience. Compared to a lot of other games in the series, it's quite simple, yet also jam-packed with a ton of customizable content, while never being overwhelming. This game saved the series in a way, and whether it's due to the game itself or a lucky release timing and marketing, it's a damn good thing whatever they did to allow us to receive more Fire Emblem games in this amazing franchise.